Welcome to Prevention First, the MedExplained101 series where we follow the science on how to stop disease before it starts. I'm your host. Let's get into it. Before we begin, this content is produced by MedExplained101 for educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional. Amara is 34 years old. She teaches primary school in Kigali, Rwanda. She is one of the most thoughtful people in her community, the parent other parents call when they have a question. 3 months ago, she almost didn't bring her daughter Aisha to get vaccinated. A message had been circulating in her WhatsApp group. It claimed the measles vaccine caused autism. It included a study. It looked scientific. Other parents were worried. Amara was worried. She spent 2 nights reading everything she could find, and then she brought Aisha in. What Amara found is what we are going to cover today, because the science is clear, the history is remarkable, and the confusion is costing lives. Before we get into the biology, let's start with a number. Vaccines currently prevent between 4 and 5 million deaths every single year. Not over a decade. Every single year. And according to the WHO, if global coverage were fully optimized, that number could rise to 8 million lives saved annually. And there is a third number on screen, 660,000. That is the number of new cervical cancer cases recorded globally in 2022, a disease caused almost entirely by a virus we now have a vaccine against. That is not a pharmaceutical claim. That is the result of 200 years of data, thousands of clinical trials, and billions of people whose immune systems now carry protection they were taught, not born with. Here is what you will understand by the end of this video. Exactly how a vaccine trains your immune system. Why the most famous anti-vaccine study was retracted and its author struck off. How vaccines have changed the trajectory of disease in Sub-Saharan Africa. And 3 things everyone needs to know before the next time someone questions vaccines in your presence. Let's start with the basics. Your immune system has 2 layers of defense. The first is your innate immune system, the immediate, non-specific response. Think of it as your body's security guards at the front door. They see something foreign, they attack it. The second layer is your adaptive immune system, slower to activate, but far more powerful. This system does something remarkable. It learns. It identifies the specific shape of an invader, what scientists call an antigen, and it builds a targeted weapon against it called an antibody. And here is the critical part. Once it has built that weapon, it remembers how to make it. Memory B cells and memory T cells persist in your body for years, sometimes decades, so that if the same invader appears again, your immune system can respond within hours rather than days. A vaccine works by introducing your immune system to a version of a pathogen, a virus or bacteria, that cannot make you sick, but is real enough that your immune system mounts a full response. It learns. It builds antibodies. It stores memory. When the real pathogen arrives, your body is not meeting it for the first time. It already knows the answer. Not all vaccines use the same approach. There are 4 main types. Live attenuated vaccines use a weakened form of the actual pathogen. The MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, works this way. The pathogen is real but stripped of its ability to cause serious disease. These vaccines produce the strongest, longest-lasting immune response. Inactivated vaccines use a killed version of the pathogen. The flu shot and some polio vaccines work this way. Safer for immunocompromised individuals, but often require booster doses. Subunit vaccines use only a specific piece of the pathogen, usually a protein on its surface. The hepatitis B vaccine and the HPV vaccine work this way. Highly targeted, very safe. And then there is the newest technology, mRNA vaccines. These do not contain any part of the pathogen at all. They deliver a set of genetic instructions that tell your own cells to produce a protein that looks like part of the pathogen. Your immune system responds to that protein, builds antibodies, stores memory. and the mRNA is broken down by the body within days. The COVID-19 vaccines developed by Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna used mRNA technology. The science behind them had been in development for over 30 years before COVID. The pandemic accelerated the regulatory timeline. It did not skip the science. And the HPV vaccine deserves a moment of its own. It is the world's first vaccine specifically designed to prevent cancer. Not an infection, not a respiratory virus, but cancer itself. Human papillomavirus causes nearly all cases of cervical cancer. In Scotland, researchers tracked women who were vaccinated against HPV at ages 12 to 13. After up to 16 years of follow-up, they found 0 cases of invasive cervical cancer among those vaccinated. 0. In the United States, cervical cancers have declined by 27% since the HPV vaccine was introduced, with reductions exceeding 50% in areas with the highest vaccination rates. Every 10% increase in vaccination coverage is associated with a nearly 11.5% lower risk of cervical cancer, a vaccine that prevents cancer. The science has been making this possible for nearly 20 years. Most people still don't know it. There is one more concept that explains why vaccination is not just a personal decision. It is a community act. Herd immunity, or population immunity, occurs when enough people in a community are immune to a disease that the pathogen can no longer spread efficiently. It runs out of susceptible hosts. For measles, one of the most contagious diseases ever recorded, with a transmission rate up to 18, herd immunity requires approximately 95% of the population to be immune. Below that threshold, outbreaks can occur even if most people are vaccinated. This is why the 5% matters. The people who cannot be vaccinated, newborns too young for certain vaccines, immunocompromised patients on chemotherapy, people with specific allergies, they rely on the 95% around them. Vaccination is not just protection for yourself, it is protection for the most vulnerable people in your community. Now, let's address the message that was circulating in Amara's WhatsApp group. Because if you have been online in the last 25 years, you have encountered this claim that the MMR vaccine causes autism. Here is the full story. In 1998, a British doctor named Andrew Wakefield published a paper in The Lancet claiming a link between the MMR vaccine and autism in 12 children. 12. The paper triggered global panic. Vaccination rates fell. Measles outbreaks returned in countries that had all but eliminated the disease. Then investigators looked closer. The study had been funded in part by lawyers seeking to sue vaccine manufacturers, a conflict of interest Wakefield never disclosed. The data had been manipulated. Ethical violations were found in how the children were enrolled. In 2010, The Lancet fully retracted the paper. The UK General Medical Council struck Andrew Wakefield off the medical register. He lost his medical license. In the years since, more than 20 large-scale independent studies have examined the question, including a 2019 Danish cohort study of 657,461 children. And not one has found any link between the MMR vaccine and autism. The science is not divided on this question. The original study was fraudulent. The claim is false. What Amara found when she spent 2 nights reading was not ambiguity. It was a clear, consistent, replicated scientific record. And she brought Aisha in. Aisha got her MMR vaccine. She had a sore arm for a day. She was grumpy for an evening. By the next morning, she was back to herself. Amara took a screenshot of the Lancet retraction notice and sent it to her WhatsApp group. 3 other parents in the group booked appointments within a week. That is herd immunity at the community level, not just biology, but information. Accurate information, shared by a trusted person in a space where people actually talk. That is what MedExplained101 is trying to be. Now let's talk about Sub-Saharan Africa, because the narrative that African countries lag on vaccination is not the full picture. Rwanda, Amara's country, achieved 97% measles vaccination coverage in 2022. That is higher than the United Kingdom, higher than the United States, and above the 95% herd immunity threshold. How? Through a combination of community health worker networks reaching the last mile, government-led immunization campaigns, and strong partnership with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, which has supported the vaccination of more than 1 billion children in low- and middle-income countries since 2000. Ethiopia ran one of the largest COVID-19 vaccination campaigns in Africa, deploying mobile vaccination units to pastoralist communities, populations that move with their livestock and cannot be served by fixed facilities. Nigeria's NPHCDA, the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, has systematically rebuilt its cold chain infrastructure to maintain vaccine potency at the point of delivery in remote areas. At the continental level, Africa CDC's Partnerships for African Vaccine Manufacturing has articulated a goal of enabling Africa to produce 60% of the vaccines it uses by 2040, strengthening regional vaccine security and reducing reliance on external supply chains. And then there is cervical cancer. 18 of the 20 countries with the world's highest cervical cancer burden are in Sub-Saharan Africa. More than 70,000 women on the continent die from cervical cancer every year, a disease that is almost entirely preventable with the HPV vaccine. The response is accelerating. In the WHO African region, HPV vaccine coverage among girls by age 15 increased from 5% in 2014 to 47% in 2024. Placing Africa second globally in HPV vaccination coverage behind only the Americas. It is not fast enough, but the direction is clear, the tools already exist, and African health systems are deploying them. The story of vaccines in Sub-Saharan Africa is not a story of deficit. It is a story of innovation, resilience, and a health infrastructure that is being built from within. 3 more misconceptions worth clearing up, because they keep circulating and they keep doing damage. First, natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity. For some diseases, natural infection does produce strong immunity. It also carries the risk of serious illness, complications, or death getting there. Vaccines give you the immunity without the risk of the disease itself. For most vaccine-preventable diseases, this is a better trade. Second, vaccines contain dangerous ingredients. Vaccines contain preservatives, stabilizers, and adjuvants, substances that help the immune system respond more strongly. These appear in tiny, carefully measured doses that have been tested for safety in thousands of trials. The formaldehyde in some vaccines, for example, is present in lower quantities than occurs naturally in a pear. Third, if most people are vaccinated, I don't need to be. This is the free rider problem. And it only works until vaccination rates drop below the herd immunity threshold. At that point, everyone who chose not to vaccinate contributes to the outbreak that follows. Key points to take note on vaccines. Number 1. Vaccines work by training your immune system to recognize a pathogen before you encounter it. The science has been established for over 200 years. Number 2. The 1998 Wakefield study claiming a link between the MMR vaccine and autism was retracted, its author lost his medical license, and 20 or more subsequent studies of hundreds of thousands of children found no link. The claim is false. Number 3. Vaccination is not just a personal choice. Below the herd immunity threshold, the most vulnerable people in your community lose the protection they depend on. Amara did not stop the WhatsApp message from spreading, but she answered it, with evidence, with patience, and with her own decision. And 3 children in her community are now protected who might not have been. In this episode of MedExplained101 Prevention First series, we covered how your immune system works, innate and adaptive, and how vaccines train it to recognize a threat before it arrives. The 4 vaccine types, and why the HPV vaccine is unlike anything that came before it. Herd immunity, how it works, what the threshold means, and why the 5% matters. The Wakefield story, what was claimed, what was fraudulent, and what 657,000 children in Denmark actually showed. Africa's vaccine leadership, from Rwanda's 97% measles coverage, to Ethiopia's mobile units, to Nigeria's cold chain rebuild. And 3 misconceptions on natural immunity, ingredients, and the free rider problem, and why none of them hold up. In a world full of health misinformation, what you do next matters. Think of one person, a friend, a family member, someone in your community, who might be living with confusion, fear, or false information about vaccines, about their health, about what science actually says. Share this with them, not because it is easy, because accurate health information reaches the people who need it most, only when someone who already has it decides to pass it on. That is what the Clarity Movement is. You are already part of it. Subscribe to MedExplained101 for a new episode every week on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook, and Substack. This is MedExplained101, from confusion to clarity.